The first map I ever owned had a ghost on it, a clean blank patch of paper where a mountain should be, a ghost of missing ink rather than a pale woman on a ridge. The rest of the range was laced with contour lines and foreign place names. That one square of the eastern border was white, as if the cartographer had run out of ink in that exact spot and decided the land didn't matter. My father pointed at that gap once when I was 10. Lingpa Ri, he told me, the mountain that keeps names. He tapped the border where 3 countries argued with each other in thin red lines. Old maps show it. New maps pretend it isn't there. I asked why. He folded the map and went to check his ropes instead of answering. 3 weeks later, he walked toward that blank patch with a joint army team and never came back. I spent the next 20 years taking other men to other mountains for a living. Maps, I learned, leave out all kinds of things. Villages, smuggling paths, minefields, the names of boys who do not return from conscription patrols. I told myself the white square on my office map was just another omission in a world full of them. Then the Americans walked into my office and bought the blank place with cash I could not refuse. My office was the front room of my house, a narrow concrete space 1 level up from the street. The sign outside promised Dorje Alpine Logistics in 3 languages. On good years, that meant tourists with bright gear and nervous smiles, paying for safe adventure and careful selfies. On bad years, it meant escorting mining surveyors and army officers who treated the valley like a storage yard for bodies and excuses. The morning they came, I was at my desk trying to make the numbers for the month line up with the loan payments on the house. A stack of invoices leaned toward a chipped mug with a tea stain circling the bottom. Under the mug, for weight, sat a folded list of my younger brother's conscription lottery dates. My brother Tenzing was good at hiding worry. The conscription list did not care. For the last year, an officer from the district headquarters had been visiting every few weeks with new forms and reminders about our duty to the nation. Duty always seemed to need another signature. The bell on the office door clicked. 3 men stepped in, bringing cold with them and the quiet, firm attitude of people who expected a room to rearrange around them. Dorje Nima? The first one scanned the room, then fixed on me. Holbrook. I recognized the type before I knew his name. American accent, embassy haircut, that smooth way of standing like he lived half in front of a camera. He wore mountain clothing that had never seen dirt. Behind him came a taller man, shoulders too squared, gaze moving as if he expected someone to shoot from the alley across the street. Knocks, security, some flavor. His boots were worn in the right way. His hands weren't. The third man carried himself like he was trying hard to take up less space than he had. Darker skin, thick beard, eyes drifting to the topographic maps on my wall. Evans. He held a hard case like it was fragile and more important than any of us. "We're looking for a guide," Holbrook told me, crossing to the desk without waiting. "Strictly private expedition. High altitude, technical terrain. That describes most of the valley." I closed the ledger. "Where exactly?" He didn't answer at once. The 3 of them studied the map above my desk. New issue, satellite base, glossy. Lingpa Ri sat in the middle of the wall like something I had deliberately painted over. Evans's gaze kept returning to the blank patch. Holbrook reached up and tapped the empty square. "Here." I leaned back in my chair. "There's nothing there." "That's the problem we're interested in. No legal routes in that sector." I opened a drawer and pulled out an older military-issue map, the one I only showed people after I trusted them. I let it unfold flat on the desk. The older paper showed the peak in faded ink. Lingpa Ri, height marked, contour rings tight around it like drawn breath. "This is a restricted zone, border disputes, old minefields, weather no one bothers predicting because no one is supposed to be there. We'll handle permits." Holbrook placed a folder on the desk. "Embassy clearance, regional command authorization, all very dull. We just need someone who knows the valley." Knox studied me, and someone who knows how to keep his mouth shut. Research team, Holbrook went on. Glacial dynamics, climate models, very boring. I glanced at the folder. The seals on the permits were real. The signatures at the bottom included names I'd only seen on notices about counterinsurgency operations, not science projects. Evans set his case down and met my eyes. "You've climbed in that sector before." It wasn't a question. I reached for a pen instead of answering. "Never with foreigners," I told him. "No one with a camera. That entire valley is trouble. Border posts move every few years. Maps don't keep up. Men disappear and nobody files paperwork. My father in army khaki, walking away from us with his pack. My mother standing at the door, hands pressed together until the bones showed. The officer who came later with a folded flag and the word avalanche." Holbrook opened the folder. The contract inside was printed in clean English and clumsy Nepali, as if translated by someone who learned from a screen and never heard anyone speak. "You're overpaying. We're paying for discretion, competence, and risk." Holbrook's tone stayed easy. "You've worked with joint teams before." He knew that much. I had done haulage and route finding for UN observers, aid missions, and a few operations nobody named out loud. Once, a man from the capital had shown me a picture of my father and thanked me for maintaining a tradition of service. I almost punched him. "My answer is no." I slid the folder back. "There are many glaciers here. I can show you ones that haven't killed my family yet." Knox's gaze flicked toward the lone window, then back. "We can find another guide. Our paperwork includes liaison with the local command. Would be a shame if they re-examined certain conscription exemptions. You have a brother, don't you?" He had done his homework. I hated him for knowing. Holbrook lifted a calming hand toward Knox, stage managing the tension. "We don't want anyone forced into anything they're not comfortable with. Let's focus on the positive." He reached into his pack and unfolded a thin plastic sleeve. Inside was a photograph faded to a greyish cast, like it had been copied too many times. A group of men in mixed uniforms stood in front of a snow wall. Some wore American gear, some Soviet, some local issue. One man near the center had my jawline and my ears, and the same habit of resting his hand on the knot of his rope. My father looked younger than he had in any photo at home. His name was scrawled on the back in English and Nepali. "I don't remember giving you permission to use his picture in your sales pitch. This image comes from a Cold War archive." Holbrook's voice softened. "Joint observation mission, late 70s. They went to Lingpa Ri to build a containment facility around an anomaly both sides had been tracking for years. They stopped transmitting after a certain point. Official cause, collapse during excavation. Unofficially, there were erratic readings before they went out. Project Obsidian never closed the file." Obsidian. The word sounded familiar. I had heard it once, muffled through the door when my father argued with an officer years ago. My mother had turned up the radio to drown them out. "What is Project Obsidian?" "A long story about gravity surveys and political fear." Holbrook shrugged. "For our purposes, it's the program paying for this expedition. The people who wrote your father's last orders want a fresh look with better sensors." "And fewer Soviets," Knox added. Evans shifted beside the desk. "We have reason to think the site remained active, even after the facility was abandoned. There are signals, reflections. Lingpa Ri isn't empty." I stared at the contract. The advance payment would clear the loan on my house. Another line item would, in careful bureaucratic language, authorize a review of my brother's conscription status. "Why the secrecy?" I asked. "Why off the books? Why not reopen the facility officially through your chain of command?" "Because there are 3 flags within artillery range of that peak, and none of them enjoy surprises." Holbrook's smile thinned. "A large operation would draw too much attention. A small team with a local guide might pass as a research outing. No one has to know what we found until we know what it is. You expect me to walk my people into a restricted valley so you can finish a job that killed my father decades ago. I expect you to make sure fewer people die this time. Holbrook's voice dropped. You know the terrain. You know how our military units operate here. With or without you, Obsidian will eventually send someone. I'd rather have your judgment on the ground. Knox leaned his elbows on the desk, close enough that I could see a thin white scar across his left index finger. You take the money. You buy your brother out. You guide us in. We do our work. We leave. And the valley goes back to whatever passes for normal in this place. Or you refuse, and someone else takes us in blind, and the army starts asking why you're not showing the flag enough. I looked at Evans. He watched my father's photograph through the plastic sleeve. His expression wasn't hungry the way Holbrook's was. It was tired, guilty even. You've been involved in this before. Obsidian. He nodded once. I worked on some of the instruments years ago. The data arrived without context, just anomalies. I wanted to see the source. And now you're here to see what your work did. That too. I unfolded the contract again. The clauses were written by someone who understood how to wrap threats in polite words, penalty for disclosure, security protocols, shared liability. I thought of Tenzing's lottery date circled on a wall calendar at home, my mother's hands counting days, the blank space on the map and the itch under my ribs every time my eyes slipped over it. They would go with or without me. With another guide, they would still drag my valley into whatever came next. At least if I was on the mountain, I could see it. Maybe tug it a little one way or another. I signed. Holbrook's relief escaped in a small breath. We move in 2 days. We'll need porters, enough for 3 weeks of supplies and equipment. We'll provide specialized gear. You handle local logistics. You'll stay under my authority on route and altitude. I closed the folder. You follow my instructions on safety, or you go back down on your own. Knox's mouth quirked. We'll listen to reason where we can. Just remember our priorities when things go sideways. They already did. I tapped the blank square on the wall map. The moment you pointed at that, I walked them out to the balcony so the neighbors could see us leaving together, paperwork in hand. It was easier to keep track of trouble if it stayed in the open. When they disappeared around the corner, I went back inside and pulled the old map from the wall. The ink on Lingpa Ri was faded, but the peak's shape was clear. An alpine triangle, another summit among many. I traced the contour lines with my fingertip until my skin warmed the paper. The white square on the new map hung above the older one, like a censored thought. Lingpa Ri, I murmured, mountain that keeps names. I had just sold mine to it. 2 days later, we walked out of the village with 6 porters and too much gear. My porters were men I trusted to gripe loudly, tie knots correctly, and run when I told them to. Dorje Namgyal with his bad knee and a constant stream of proverbs under his breath. Thin, wiry Pasang, who always walked a few steps ahead, eyes on the sky. Dorje Tashi, who had once climbed with my father and refused to speak about that trip. The younger ones eyed the Americans' equipment with a mix of curiosity and resentment. Knox marched near the front, scanning ridgelines and gullies, as if expecting armed men behind every rock. Holbrook kept pace with me, asking about trail conditions. Evans carried his instruments himself, refusing to trust the delicate cases to anyone else's grip. We took the standard pilgrim route out of the valley for the first day, so anyone watching would assume we were leading an ordinary high-altitude trek. Prayer flags lined the early path, colors bleached by years of wind. Men in uniform lounged outside a checkpoint halfway up, rifles across their laps, eyes sharp under bored posture. The captain on duty watched our group approach and stepped forward when he recognized me. Dorje, busy this season. Rent doesn't rest. I handed over the stack of forms Holbrook had given me. Private research expedition, embassy permits attached. The captain flipped through the pages, stopping at a specific seal from regional command, the same stamp that appeared on conscription orders and detainment notices. His gaze moved to Holbrook. American? Geophysics, Holbrook answered easily. We're here to count ice. If you find extra, bring it down for us. The captain smiled without humor, then handed the papers back. You're cleared, Dorje. Try not to step on anything you can't pay for. He didn't say mines. He didn't have to. Past the checkpoint, the path narrowed. We climbed through thinning scrub and low rock, altitude creeping into my lungs in the familiar way. The Americans were fit enough. Knox moved with the loose readiness of a man used to bad terrain. Holbrook breathed harder, but kept up, likely thanks to a regimen of altitude drugs. Evans's pace was determined, the kind of effort built on treadmills and stairwells. At the first night's camp, I watched them by the light of their compact lanterns. Holbrook hunched over a tablet, reviewing satellite imagery. Knox took apart his rifle and cleaned it with habitual care. Evans plugged instruments into battery packs and checked their readouts, lips moving in quiet calculations. Namgyal sat near me, knees bent, fingers tracing the pattern of old scars through his trousers. You shouldn't have taken this job, he muttered. You took it too. I took it because you did. His eyes flicked toward the Americans. Lingpa Ri eats men, Nima. Your father went there and never walked out. The old men in the village talk about it like a place that remembers. They say if you go in, the mountain learns you, that it can send you back later, wearing your own face wrong. That's a story to keep children away from crevasses. Stories stick because something once happened. They put a blank patch on the new maps because the agencies don't want to admit they lost something there, I said. They don't need ghosts. You really believe that? I believe rock and ice and bad decisions kill people. That's enough. He grunted. Rock and ice don't forge signatures from 3 countries on one sheet of paper. He wasn't wrong. We climbed higher over the next days, threading between ridges where border posts looked down like blunt teeth. At a fork, I pointed my group along a lesser-used track that skirted the official patrol route. Avoiding soldiers was as much a safety measure as avoiding avalanches. At each camp, Evans unfolded more equipment. Seismic sensors to plant in frozen ground. Gravimeters to measure tiny variations in weight over distance. He showed me one reading near a hanging glacier 2 days in. See this? He tapped a number with a gloved fingertip. Based on the terrain, gravity should follow this curve. Instead, we have this skew. Meaning? Something dense sits under that slope where nothing should be. Rock is everywhere here, but this pattern suggests a different concentration, like an absence that still weighs something. Try explaining that to the porters. I repacked the instrument. We tell them there's a hollow. They'll say the mountain is hungry. Maybe they're not entirely wrong. On the 3rd day, clouds stacked up over the western ridge faster than they should have. Pasang scanned the sky and shifted his pack. Storm's coming early, he muttered. We have margin. I watched the advancing shadow. We pushed to the next outcrop. There's shelter there. The forecast said clear, Holbrook called from behind us. The mountain didn't read your forecast. I checked my watch, then the angle of light. We move. We traversed a long slope of hard snow, roped together in pairs. I placed each step where the snow felt most trustworthy under my boot. There was no special sense to it, just a lifetime of listening to how the ground pushed back. Halfway across, a shudder ran through the slope, a deep internal shift, the kind that comes from within the snowpack rather than sky or wind. I barked at the line to stop. The snow under my front foot sagged, then dropped. The slab ahead fractured along an invisible line. Half the group lurched forward as the snowslide broke away and slumped downward, peeling off the underlying ice in a wide, slow-motion sheet. The rope snapped taut between us. "Hold!" I drove my axe in and braced. The porters behind me did the same. The slab slid away, carrying a chunk of the upper glacier with it. For a breathless stretch, it moved as one mass, then shattered into blocks that tumbled down slope, roaring, and left behind raw blue ice. When the noise faded, a new opening gaped where a smooth ridge of snow used to be. A narrow gash in the glacier's side, blackness inside. We stood roped on the lip of the surviving snow. Pasang stared into the cut. "That wasn't right," he whispered. "Nothing about this job is right." Knox's eyes stayed on the gap. I scanned the slope. Retreating back across the remaining bridge would be possible but risky, with the snow's strength freshly compromised. Storm clouds rolled in faster now, shadows crawling over the ranges. "We go back," Namgyal urged. "We tell them there's a gap. They can come with helicopters if they want to fall into it. No helicopter flies in this sector without 3 armies arguing about why." Holbrook stepped up beside me, harness clipped, gaze on the opening. "This looks promising." "Promising for what?" "For explaining your father's last transmission." He adjusted his glasses. "If we accept the facility was buried by a collapse, this could be part of the access route reopening. You don't know that. That's why we're here." The wind picked up, driving cold against our faces. Staying on the exposed slope meant risking more slab failures. Going down into the dark meant stepping where something in this mountain had just chosen to open a door. I weighed those choices as a practical man. The storm, the snow, the rope, the daylight. I weighed them as a son, wondering if my father had stood near this same kind of decision point. "We go down." I checked our knots. "One at a time, anchors every few meters. If anything feels wrong under your feet, you shout." Namgyal closed his eyes briefly, lips moving in some half-heard prayer. Pasang shook his head, but checked his knots. Knox's mouth twitched. "After you, Captain." "I'm not the one with rank." I swung my legs over the edge and started down. The crevasse walls at first were familiar layered ice, bubbles frozen in streaks from past seasons. My crampons bit into the surface with a steady scrape. I placed anchors with a hammer, listening for the solid ring that meant the ice could hold. 10 meters down, the walls changed. The ice thinned to a translucent skin over darker stone. A few meters more, and the rock itself had been cut. Not fractured or splintered, but shaved clean, as if by a giant chisel. Angled planes, too smooth for glacier work. Below that, metal ribs arched out of the rock. Each rib was bolted in with hardware stamped in 2 alphabets, English and Cyrillic. Someone had reinforced the natural void with engineered steel, then left it to freeze. Evans's voice drifted from above. "Do you see it?" "I see your facility." A ledge widened into a horizontal tunnel. The floor had been poured flat. I unhooked from the main rope, kicked steps to the side, and clipped into a rusted eye bolt in the wall. The bolt held. "One at a time." My voice carried up the shaft. "Step where I step." Boots and tools clinked, a muffled curse now and then. No one fell. When Evans finally lowered himself into the tunnel, he didn't crouch and catch his breath. He ran a hand along the metal ribs like a craftsman checking someone else's work. "Joint construction," he murmured. "This is it." Pasang's eyes were wide. "You never told us we were walking into a bunker. Our predecessors built a containment facility here." Holbrook dropped in next, landing heavily, one hand catching the wall. "Cold War era. They found something in the mountain and put a box around it. We're here to see what's left of the box." "And the something," I added. He didn't argue. The tunnel sloped gently downward. Our lamp beams met dry air and bare walls. No ice here. The mountain held its own weather. We moved forward slowly, careful with each step. The air felt too still, as if no draft had moved through in years. After about 50 meters, the tunnel opened. I have stood on ridgelines where you can see 3 countries at once. I have looked down into cirques that drop 1,000 meters in a continuous bowl of rock. None of that prepared me for the space under Lingpa Ri. The cavern stretched away in all directions, an engineered hollow carved inside the mountain. Metal walkways crossed it at multiple tiers like bridges in an industrial city. Some sagged where supports had bent, others remained rigid, bolts still bright as if installed yesterday. Panels in the ceiling emitted a flat, sourceless light that painted everything in tired grey. Along the nearest wall, cranes hung on tracks, hooks frozen mid-swing. On the floor far below, rows of long stone boxes stood in a grid. Each was roughly the length of a man, and a bit more. Metal straps crossed their lids. Narrow slits ran along the sides. Containment units, Holbrook breathed. Sarcophagi for samples under controlled conditions, not coffins. The word sarcophagus comes from Greek. I'd picked that up once from a tourist brochure. It originally meant flesh-eater. "Why is the power still on?" Evans whispered. "There's no visible generator, and those panels are still putting out light." Redundancies. Holbrook's gaze roamed the ceiling. Deep reserves. They built this place to last. Knox leaned against the railing and studied the emptiness below. Or they never got the chance to turn it off. The catwalks were bare. No bodies, no bones, no obvious signs of a last stand. Just metal and stone and that stubborn light. "Your job wasn't supposed to include this," I told the porters. "You want to turn back, you can. I'll say it was my call. And walk back up that ice hole with the snow waiting to fall on us." Pasang shook his head. "We're in it now." Namgyal spat over the railing in an old gesture of warding. "If we walk among those stones," he muttered, "keep your eyes on each other's faces." We rigged a safety line on the nearest staircase and descended to the floor. Up close, the stone boxes looked less like coffins and more like oversized trunks carved from single blocks. Narrow viewing slits ran the length at eye height. Metal clamps fixed the lids. Some clamps had rusted. Others looked newly installed, heavier than the originals. Each unit bore an alphanumeric code. A few had names scratched in by hand, surnames in Cyrillic, American nicknames, even one in clumsy Nepali script. The writing had the bored, restless look of something done by soldiers, not scientists. "This is where we start." Holbrook pointed to a row near a cluster of consoles. "The monitoring bays. The logs mention early samples stored here. The logs also mention a failure." I watched his face. "Which is why we go slowly." Evans pried open one of his hard cases and unpacked instruments, sampling rods, cameras, insulated vials. His hands trembled slightly before he steadied them. "Pick one," Holbrook told him. Evans scanned the codes, then stopped at a unit labelled with both an American serial and a stenciled Nepali number. "This one's near the original primary sensors." "Fine." Holbrook lifted a hand toward the porters. I stepped between him and the stone. "We do this my way. You don't order my men around in this place." Holbrook's hands opened in polite surrender. "Of course." I turned to the porters. "Harnesses on. Anchor ropes. We crack the lid slowly. No one leans over it. If anything moves inside, you step back fast." They obeyed. Whatever they thought of obsidian or my father's fate, they trusted me about rock and ice and metal. We loosened the clamps one by one. Rust flaked. Metal groaned under decades of pressure. The lid shifted, then lifted. A sharp hiss cut the silence as the seal broke and the box sucked in a thin breath of air. "No leaning in." I nodded to Evans. "Scope first." He eased a probe camera through the slit. The portable screen showed only black at first, a surface, glossy but without reflections. Then the camera adjusted and revealed the shape. A basin carved into the bottom of the stone, filled with fluid that refused to behave like anything I'd seen. It rose in a low mound instead of lying level. The edges curved up, clinging to the stone as if hugging the center. Nothing dripped, nothing flowed. Their notes called it non-Newtonian, Evans murmured. responsive to shear stress. That doesn't really... Save the lecture for your report. Knox's eyes stayed on the basin. Tell me if it can climb. Don't give it ideas, Pasang muttered. Evans prepared a sampling rod. Metal tube, vacuum seal designed to pull up a small volume without spilling. He checked his gloves. Thick, insulated, sleeves taped. Remember upstairs. I stood ready at a control panel with a power pack. You pull a sample, you seal it, we leave the rest alone. He nodded and leaned over the box, moving slowly. The probe touched the surface. For a second, nothing changed. Then the mound rose toward the metal tip, like a plant turning toward light. The fluid stretched upward in a narrow column. It didn't drip. It adhered to the rod, climbing. The vacuum valve clicked, pulling in a portion. The column snapped back, reshaping into the basin. Evans pulled the rod away, studying the sealed vial. The portion inside pressed against the glass, testing its boundaries with lazy, deliberate motions. That shouldn't behave like that at this temperature, he muttered. Seal it. Knox stepped closer. The moment Evans twisted the end cap into its locked position, the fluid inside surged. It pressed against the cap, then against the glass. For an instant, the vial seemed to flex. The main basin responded. The surface rippled. Lines rose and fell, forming ridges. Then the entire mass erupted upward, leaping from the stone in a thick stream that latched onto the sampling rod and climbed. Drop it. I lunged toward him. Evans tried. The fluid had already wrapped his glove. It moved faster than his reflex. Black bands spiraled up his wrist and under his sleeve, thinning to push through the smallest gaps. Evans's scream cut through the hangar, raw and high. It snapped everyone into motion. I grabbed the cable I'd connected to the portable battery and slapped the exposed end against the stone rim. The current arced into the fluid. The mass shuddered. Some of it recoiled, dripping back into the basin, but a portion had already reached bare skin at Evans's elbow, where his protective layer had ridden up as he struggled. His forearm convulsed, veins swelled, darkening, then sank as the black material moved deeper. Knox lunged, grabbed Evans's shoulder and yanked him back, tearing the remaining glove off. The detached fluid splashed onto the floor and skidded away, gathering near Knox's boot. In a heartbeat, the pooled mass stretched and shaped itself into the outline of a man lying on the metal grating. Limbs formed, crude at first, then more precise. Fingers extruded, then divided. A surface like skin shimmered across the figure, settling into contours that matched Evans's build. We backed away in a half circle. The figure pushed itself upright. It looked like Evans without color, more mannequin cast in shadow than flesh. Details of clothing and gear rose from its surface in low relief, mimicking folds and straps. When it spoke, the voice was Evans's. Too bright. It lifted a hand to its face, miming the gesture of shielding eyes it didn't have. Too bright in here now. Evans's chest heaved. He clutched his arm, knuckles white. What are you? Holbrook's composure slipped a millimeter. The copy tilted its head. Evans Omar, doctor, materials group. Its gaze traveled over us, one by one. Dorje Nima, guide, contracted. Hearing my name in that flat imitation made my skin feel too tight. You shouldn't know my name. You told a story in the tent, about a slip on a training hill when you were 14. You laughed when the rope burned your palms. That had happened. 3 nights ago, we'd traded camp stories. He'd told one about a frozen pond near his village. I'd told one about a hillside near ours. The copy went on. You learned not to trust weather from a phone. You trust clouds and the way snow sounds under your boots. Your father... Enough! My grip tightened on the live cable. Evans's copy turned toward him instead. You fell through the ice on a base in Germany when you were a child. The drill sergeant pulled you out and called you an idiot. You learned to respect freezing water. Evans flinched. I never lived in Germany. Inside the smooth face, shapes shifted. as if muscles it had never had were trying to coordinate. Correction. The voice reset mid-syllable. You fell through the ice on a village pond in Punjab in winter. Your father pulled you out and called you an idiot. You learned to respect freezing water. The story blurred, half synthetic, half true. Knox lifted his rifle, sights to his cheek. Back in the box, the copy looked at him, Evans' features rearranging into a smirk. Captain Raoul Knox, 43, 2 tours in... It stopped. Something in its posture changed. The corners of its mouth turned down. You don't want to go back in the box either, it said quietly. You didn't like the way it felt. Knox stiffened. I remember the steel on teeth. The copy's voice flattened. The clamp on the lid. The voices arguing above. The promise to return with better tools. They didn't. We? Holbrook edged closer, eyes bright. You remember previous events. I remember what is recorded. The copy looked past us toward the rows of sarcophagi. Many recordings, many patterns, all stored, some incomplete. Patterns of what? I asked. Of you. It gestured at us. Bodies, voices, choices, stored and revised. Knox's finger tightened. I'm not your storage device. You don't have to be. You can be a carrier, a link. I can leave this place if... Knox fired. The shot punched into its chest. The impact drove it back half a step. A dark hole opened and closed as the material flowed around the bullet path. The copy looked down at itself, almost curious. You can't hurt it with a gun, Evans gasped. Then we find something else. Knox fired again, aiming at knee and shoulder. Holes opened, then closed behind the bullets. The thing moved toward him faster now. Back. I slashed the live cable across the floor. The arc jumped, striking one leg. The copy jerked. Its knee buckled. It dropped for an instant, then caught itself. An arm shot out, catching Knox's wrist. The contact lasted less than a second. Enough. Black fluid rippled up Knox's skin, squeezing through the tight seam between his glove and sleeve. His hand spasmed, fingers clamping on the rifle. He tried to wrench free. The fluid climbed his forearm, tracing old scars and new veins. A strangled sound broke from him as he twisted, trying to use the rifle as leverage. The copy rode his movements, its mass flowing up, wrapping shoulder and neck. For a heartbeat, Knox and the imitation shared one outline. Half his face stayed human, teeth bared, eye wild. The other half smoothed into Evans's shape, lips forming words out of sequence. He slammed that side of his body against the edge of the sarcophagus. The impact dislodged some of the fluid. It slopped onto the stone and clung. I shoved the cable toward Evans. Evans, pale and shaking, grabbed it and jammed the contact against Knox's shoulder. Current surged. Knox convulsed. A sound tore out of the mass, high, grinding. It came from the stuff itself, not from any throat. The portion clinging to Knox's skin tore loose and sprayed outward like ink under pressure. It splattered the far wall, ran down, pooled on the floor, then slithered toward a drainage grate as if pulled by memory. Knox collapsed, dragging in quick breaths through clenched teeth. The left side of his face sagged, features pulled towards something they had tried and failed to become. His left arm hung oddly, muscles trembling as if unsure how to hold bone. I'm fine, he whispered. He wasn't, but he was alive, and the copy on the floor had vanished below the grating. We stared at the basin. The main body of fluid had retreated, huddled into itself. It still filled the hollow, but the previously smooth surface bore tiny ripples. Evans cradled his arm and met my eyes. We learned some things. We learned it once out. I coiled the cable with stiff fingers. We learned getting between it and a host is a good way to die. Holbrook exhaled, hands shaking before he forced them steady. We also learned it retains information for decades. It remembered the ceiling, the voices. It connected past recordings with the present. That's unprecedented. Congratulations. I looped the cable. Your sample is running loose under the floor. Your security man is half invaded. My men just watched a thing wear their friend's face. How much more precedent do you need before we close the lid and get out? We can't leave it unstudied. Holbrook glanced at the rows of sarcophagi. There are dozens, maybe hundreds of units here. Each one could contain a different pattern, different data. Each one could contain someone's father, Namgyal muttered. I turned toward the row near the back where I had seen Nepali script among the codes. We start making rules, I told them. No bare skin near open containers. No one works alone. Anyone who starts misremembering something basic gets isolated. Evans, keep your distance until we know how much of that got into you. Knox, you don't point a weapon at anything without my order. Holbrook, stop thinking like a man in a conference room and start thinking like someone who has to carry these men out on a stretcher. You're overstepping. In here, there's no embassy. There's gravity in whatever this is. You need me more than I need you. He held my gaze, then nodded once. We'll work cooperatively. For now. We opened more boxes. It felt insane. It also felt inevitable. Holbrook hadn't come all this way to turn around after one failed sample, and the porters knew that if we returned without a clear report, the officials in town would blame us, not the Americans. We tried to be methodical. We picked sarcophagi near consoles that might hold data, ones with signs of prior monitoring. We used longer tools, thicker gloves, more power packs. Each time we cracked a lid, we found the same arrangement: stone basin, black fluid, straps. Each time we disturbed the surface, something responded. In one unit, the fluid remained still until a porter shifted his weight too close. Tendrils reached toward the warmth through the slit, as if scenting. The man jumped back before contact. The fluid subsided, patient. In another, we only watched through the scope. The surface quivered in waves that matched our speech patterns. When Evans recited numbers, the waves flattened. When Namgyal muttered a proverb about mountains listening, the waves intensified at different frequencies. We logged what we could. Then we found the worst one. It started with the name. The sarcophagus sat near a block of equipment with old Nepali army markings. Someone had scratched a local name into the stone. Dorje T. The handwriting was rough, hurried. My father's name was Dorje Tashi. There are many Dorjes, many Tashis. I knew it wasn't coincidence. My fingers went cold inside my gloves. Holbrook followed my gaze. We don't have to open that one yet. You didn't come here to let names lie, I answered. You came here for them. Pasang frowned at the carving. This could be anyone. The army uses Dorje like salt. Stay back. I moved to the clamps. I'll handle the lid. Namgyal stepped beside me. If something uses your father's voice, you don't listen. Whatever you hear, remember it isn't him. I know, I told him. We unclamped the lid and levered it up. Air pushed against my face again. The basin below held the same black fluid as the others. No special mark. Evans raised the scope. We shouldn't engage it directly. Not until we understand why. The fluid rose. It flowed upward in a broad column without being touched, pressed against the underside of the lid, then slid through the viewing slit like floodwater. We stumbled back. The mass hit the floor and spread, then compressed, limbs extruded, details settled. In a few heartbeats, a human outline stood in front of me. My father's build emerged, the age he'd been in that old photograph. Lean, fit, not yet worn by years of work. His face formed piece by piece as if sculpted from inside. Cheekbones, nose, jaw. Lines around the mouth from smiling. A tiny scar above his left eyebrow from when he fell from a tree as a boy. My grandmother's story. The fluid approximated climbing gear instead of a uniform. Ropes, pack, harness. He lifted his head and looked at me. Nima. The pitch, the rhythm, the way he clipped the last syllable like an affectionate tap. He'd used that tone waking me for early climbs, when we were alone and my mother was still asleep. My heart lurched in a way I did not want to examine. You're late. The imitation glanced past me, as if towards some remembered icefall. We were supposed to rendezvous yesterday at the icefall. Every man in the room watched. They knew who this was supposed to be. You're not him. It smiled the way my father used to, one corner of the mouth higher. I know. He's dead. I read the file. I had never heard confirmation, only official phrases like missing in action. How did he die? In the collapse. The thing gestured vaguely upward. The facility lost power to one quadrant. Containment failed. Project Command ordered us to seal the units manually and then seal the access tunnels. We ran out of time. Some of us were inside when the lids closed. Some of us were outside. Your father was in between. In between what? Patterns. It touched its chest. Recordings. He went in to shut me down. The rock moved. I finished one recording and began another. Holbrook edged closer, careful of the floor. You remember the sequence. I remember what was captured. The imitation's gaze moved to the other sarcophagi. Not everything. Enough to reconstruct operations, enough to reconstruct him. It nodded towards me. Enough to talk to his son. That's not what you are. My voice came out flat. You're a piece of him, a broken piece. Pieces are all anyone gets. The tone there sounded more like my father than my father ever had. Practical resignation. You want to know what happened here or not? Evans shifted, wincing as he balanced his sore arm. We need details. Layout, failure mode, lower structures. The imitation turned toward him. You built better instruments. Good. Your earlier designs lacked resolution. Too much noise from the underlying channels. Underlying channels? Evans frowned. The thing pointed toward the floor. Pre-existing alignments. Before you dug. Before your parents were born. Before this border existed. Whoever carved those built the first cage. You built another around it. Useful, but insufficient. I pictured the older structures in the control room, the non-human restraints, the scratched diagram with escaped gouged over the secondary chamber. You talk like you're separate from whoever carved those, I said. I am what accumulates. The imitation's voice flattened into something that wasn't my father's. They made the grooves. You poured more patterns into them. Now I am the record of both. It looked back at me. You are Dorje Nima, guide, local asset, contract primary. Your designation is associated with several projections. Would you like to hear them? No. Our models suggest a high probability you will help us leave the mountain. You're getting ahead of yourself. I tightened my grip on the cable. I led these men in. I can lead them out. That's all. When your father went deeper, he told himself he was just going to close a valve. The thing's tone sharpened. Purpose is an overlay. The route is what matters. You walk the same path he did. The difference is that your map shows the blank place. He walked in blind. Enough! I swung the cable. The metal end struck its chest. The jolt snapped through the surface. Its form cracked like drying mud. Segments fell away, splattering to the floor, then flowed back toward the basin. It staggered, then straightened again, shape less precise, face blurred. A broken smile tugged at its lips. You killed this pattern once already, it said, voice glitching between my father's tones and others. You'll do it again. That's the only decision you know how to make. Back in the box. It obeyed, not out of fear, out of strategy. The mass slid back into the basin. The surface quieted. My father's face dissolved. I stood there, cable in hand, shaking. Pasang's hand found my shoulder. We should leave this one sealed. Forever. We should leave all of them sealed. Namgyal's voice was low and steady. We should find a way to bring this whole place down and trigger ground motion visible from orbit. Holbrook's words were dry. Artillery from all sides. Imagine your valley under 3 flags crossfire. He wasn't wrong. I hated him for that. We clean up and regroup in the control room. Then we decide the next move. No one goes near these units without me there. I clamped the lid over my father's pattern and hoped stone could hold what I'd just enraged. The control room sat a level above the sarcophagi, behind thick glass that overlooked the hangar. Consoles lined the walls, some dead, some flickering faintly. Dust lay thick, disturbed only by our own hands. Cold War-era panels, switches, analog gauges, keyboards with worn letters crowded the benches. Under them, older structures protruded, bands of metal with unfamiliar joints, plates with shallow, regular grooves bending around corners without distortion. Symbols etched into the ancient components in a script I didn't recognize. No local language, no Cyrillic, no English. Evans ran his fingers along one plate. This isn't from the same decade. Or the same century, Namgyal muttered. Holbrook watched an intact monitor as we powered it with a portable battery. They bolted their own control systems on top of whatever was already here. Efficient. Why build a cage from scratch when someone else dug the pit? Who dug it? I asked. Old civilization, secret pre-war research, your local myths. Holbrook's shoulders twitched. Pick a story. Obsidian never had a clear answer. All we know is that when our predecessors scanned this mountain, they found anomalies regular enough to suggest structure. When they came to investigate, they found channels already carved. They used them. The screen flickered to a dim green. Lines of text crawled upward in blocky letters, log excerpts, status messages. I leaned over Evans's shoulder as he scrolled. Entry, Site Lingpari, Phase 2 storage online, pattern density at 63%. Deviations within projected range. Entry, Soviet technical delegation requests increased access to raw samples. Request denied pending stability review. Entry, local liaison Dorji T reports superstition, uptick among porters, recommends rotation of personnel. Entry, subjective reports of time sense distortion among staff, possible field effect, refer to cognitive studies. Entry, unplanned seismic event, multiple storage units compromised, emergency protocol Obsidian Red engaged, containment priority overrides personnel safety. The log cut off there, no follow-up. Just a blinking cursor. Containment overrides personnel safety. That's the philosophy you inherited. Holbrook watched the screen. We inherited the data, he answered. The philosophy can change. Has it? We came with a small team instead of a battalion. That's a start. Because fewer witnesses are easier to explain away. He didn't reply. On the opposite wall, a carved panel showed a schematic of the facility. Rows of sarcophagi as neat rectangles, corridors as lines. Below the main hangar, another chamber had been etched in, a secondary storage field. Someone had tried to erase that part by gouging at the metal, then scratched one word over the scarred patch. Escaped. That's comforting, Pasang muttered. Maybe they drove it deeper, Evans offered, or it found its own geology to ride. I traced the lines with my finger. Those channels your box version mentioned. We stood under the tired light, the silence pressing on our ears. We need a plan. Knox's voice came from the corner. He leaned against a console, left arm hanging, half his face slack. The changed side of his body moved with a slight delay, like a puppet with snagged strings. We came to acquire a sample. We got more than that. His gaze slid to the hangar below. We know it can infiltrate hosts. We know electricity disrupts it. We know those things downstairs are storage. We have enough to write a report. We prep extraction, take what we have, and get out before the storm closes the pass. Holbrook considered him. We don't know the depth of the infrastructure. We don't know the current stability of lower levels. If there's a risk of further escapes, we need to understand it before we leave this place unwatched again. Watched by who? I asked. You think they'll station guards here? Build a fence? No one wants this place officially. That's why you came through my office instead of an airlift. Evans rubbed his temples. There's also the loose segment we lost through the drainage system. It's down there somewhere. I pictured that dark smear slipping through the grate. Finding it means going deeper. Which is what it wants. Knox's lip curled. He wasn't wrong. We're already compromised, Evans went on. That piece in the drains, whatever effect the old systems have on cognition, Knox's partial takeover. If we leave without at least trying to understand the lower architecture, we leave a leak under a mountain nobody admits exists. If the leak grows, it could move through fault lines, aquifers, and surface far from here. I finished for him. Near villages, bases, cities. That's one scenario. The other, Knox rasped, is that we go chasing it and feed it more men. And a third. I looked at the schematic. We take a piece out under controlled conditions and hope your labs can handle what this place couldn't. Holbrook's eyes flicked to mine. That's what Obsidian wants. A contained projection. Enough to study, not enough to destabilize this structure. The thing in the box wearing my father's face called that a projection. My mouth twisted. It told me it wants exactly that. We stood there, caught between flooded basins and old metal. Give me a direction to a drain access, I told Evans. He blinked. You're serious. You have instruments. They can track the anomaly's path. We follow, we see where it went. We keep our hands covered and our power lines ready. If it wants out, let it show us how. We can decide what to do with that information later. Why you? Knox asked. Because these men trust my rope more than they trust your gun. And because I'm the one who brought you here. If someone is going to die for this, it should be one of us who made that choice knowingly. That wasn't exactly true. None of us had known what we were stepping into, but my eyes had been more open than the porter's. Holbrook studied my face, then nodded. All right, we make an excursion to the lower level. Limited personnel. Me, you, Evans, Knox, 2 porters. The rest stay here. Keep the upper units sealed. Maintain comms. Comms with who? Pasang asked. With the relay station outside. Holbrook tapped his radio. When we find something worth reporting, we send a burst. They pick it up when the satellite window opens. And if you don't find anything? Pasang's eyes shifted to me. Then they assume we fell into the mountain, I answered. Like my father. The lower access lay through a maintenance shaft at the back of the hangar. The gate hung crooked, one hinge torn from its anchor. A metal ladder ran down into shadow. I went first, testing each rung. Some flexed, none broke. The shaft walls were bare rock where concrete had crumbled, veins of mineral glowing faintly in our lamp beams. At the bottom, a passage sloped away. Narrow rust stains running down its sides. The floor was slick in patches where condensation had collected and dried in ridges. Evans's instrument beeped, picking up perturbations he'd trained it to interpret. He watched the display. It went this way. He pointed left at a junction. There's a strong signature downslope. How strong? I asked. Strong enough to register through 1/2 meter of stone. We moved. The corridor walls shifted from poured concrete to the older metal plates and carved grooves we'd seen upstairs. The channels intersected at regular intervals, running into the floor. At one bend, we passed an open doorway. A window of thick glass looked into a chamber full of restraints built for bodies unlike ours. Cuffs and bars spaced for limbs longer and set at angles that didn't match human joints. Some clamps ended in curved sockets rather than rings. Fine dust coated the platforms. Old black streaks marred surfaces, dried remnants of something that used to flow. What did they hold here? Pasang whispered. Early samples, Holbrook guessed. Or the pre-existing occupants. The logs weren't clear. They built cages for something that wasn't shaped like us, I muttered, then started pouring us into the same channels. Utilitarian. Evans's eyes stayed on the grooves. They reused what worked. Ask my father's pattern how well it worked. We moved on. At a T-junction, Evans checked his instrument again. Left. The signature's stronger. The passage ended at a grated opening. Beyond it, a lower hangar stretched away. Unlike the upper hall, this one had partially collapsed. Rock had punched through broken ceiling panels. Rows of sarcophagi lay tilted or shattered where beams had bent. Dark streaks smeared the walls like old oil thrown by impact. In the far corner, a heavy gate had been welded shut. Fresh weld shone beside older rusted joins, new scars on old metal. On our side of the grate, a puddle of black fluid shimmered on the floor, thin and spread out. "It's waiting," Knox croaked. "It's listening." I stepped to the edge of the grate. The puddle lifted a portion of itself into a low column, shaping almost a face. No features, just the hint of cheeks and a mouth. When it spoke, voices layered together. My father's tone, Evans's, Knox's, others. "Nima, you found us. You already knew we would." I kept my distance. "You follow channels. It's what guides do." "It's what you do," I answered. "Follow channels in stone. We inhabit them." The column wavered. "You dig them. We record. They tried to separate us. They failed." Evans lifted his instrument. "We need to know your constraints. Can you move through solid rock? Through water? Through air? Through any medium with alignment?" The puddle rippled. "These grooves, the metals they installed, blood, your nervous systems, they all conduct in different ways, some better than others." "Why haven't you left this mountain?" I asked. "If you can move through blood, you could have ridden any soldier out." "Local conditions here are favorable." The response came without hesitation. "The channels are deep. The field is stable. Outside, you are chaotic. Your species burns what it fears, buries it, mislabels it. Here, they try to study instead. That is more useful. You don't want to be bombed. We avoid disruptions that erase too many patterns at once." The surface quivered. "Destruction is noise. We prefer signal." "You want us to take a part of you out to prevent a bigger disruption here," I said. "Exactly." The puddle spread, then gathered again. One projection, small, contained. Enough to carry the record beyond these walls. Enough to satisfy your superiors that they have what they want. They will have less reason to dig again. "And if we don't?" Knox asked. "If we collapse this access and leave you in your hole, you will be back." The voices overlapped. "If not you, then others, with less understanding of slopes and storms, with explosives, with drills. You've already written the budget lines. You count in fiscal years, but your fear runs longer." Evans wiped sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "It's not wrong." "Of course it's not wrong." I kept my eyes on the puddle. "It's listened to people like you for decades." He flinched. "How big a sample would be enough?" Holbrook asked quietly. "Give me a number, a volume." "You think in liters, in grams?" The puddle's surface shivered in something like amusement. "That's one of the reasons we keep you close. You're avoiding the question." I folded my arms. "Any projection contains the whole pattern, just at lower resolution. Carry a handful, and it will rebuild given time and material." Knox gave a dry, broken laugh. "So there is no safe amount." "No safe amount if your goal is elimination," the puddle replied. "If your goal is containment and understanding, a narrow corridor is safer than a flood." Holbrook looked at me. His eyes were bloodshot behind the lenses. "We can't leave without something. Not just because of what Obsidian expects. Because of what's at stake if we don't convince them to treat this site carefully. If we come back with nothing but vague stories and a dented rifle, they'll send in heavier teams. You know that as well as I do." "You think carrying this through my valley counts as careful?" I snapped. "I think a controlled sample is less dangerous than a tri-national incident on that border." "This is your logic, your trade-offs. My people didn't choose any of this." "You chose the contract. I chose to keep my brother's name off a list." The puddle slid closer to the grate, stopping just short. Tendrils tested the metal gaps, then withdrew, as if respecting an invisible line. You don't have to bring us through their villages, it told me. There's another route, a side tunnel that leads under the ridge to a high pass. A helicopter can lift you there, beyond the local site. Obsidian does that often. Quiet extractions, no reporters, no prayers. How do you know the route? I asked. We remember everyone who walked it. Soviet climbers, American reconnaissance officers, your father. He scouted it once. The puddle's tone dropped into my father's cadence. Before the failure, before he knew how much was under his feet, he marked the route in his head. We took that pattern. We can give it back to you. Give is generous. You will take it whether you want to or not, it answered. Refusing won't change what we are. It will only change how much collateral you allow. The porters shifted uneasily. They didn't follow every nuance, but they understood enough. Take a piece out or leave it and risk more operations. Tell me about the pass, I said. It did. It described the angle of a certain scree slope, the leaning shape of a boulder like a crouching man, the rhythm of steps needed to cross a cornice that liked to break under sudden weight. It used my father's voice for those details. He had walked that path. I recognized him in the way the route was laid out. That matches some old notes, Namgyal murmured. He talked about something like that once, before he took the army job. I didn't let him finish. You're not really trusting this thing? Pasang asked. I'm trusting the part of the pattern that came from a man I knew, I answered. Not because it wants to help me, because I know how he walked on snow. Holbrook squared his shoulders. We accept the bargain. One projection, in a sealed container, transported under controlled conditions to a secure facility. In return, you guide us to the side exit and help us stabilize the main storage here. No more releases, no interference with our departure. Agreed. The puddle's surface smoothed. You don't speak for us, I told Holbrook. I speak for Obsidian. His voice sharpened. They control the resources that decide whether anyone takes this mountain seriously. You control the rope. I control what happens after we leave. We both know who has more leverage in the long term. He wasn't wrong. Again. Fine. We do this my way up top. You follow my path exactly. You don't let that container touch bare skin. And you never tell my brother what we carried past his door. We collected a sample. Evans set up a reinforced container. Double-walled, thick seals, integrated power contacts for a constant low-level current to keep the contents agitated or stunned. He wasn't sure which word fit. We coaxed a portion of the puddle into the vial with careful tools. It slid in almost eagerly. When the cap twisted into place, the fluid pressed against the inner surface, testing. I wrapped it in padding and set it in a pack designed for sensitive optics. Who carries it? Pasang asked. I do. I cinched the straps across my chest. If anyone's going to walk into my village with this on his back, it's me. We still have to reinforce the cages, Evans added. If we leave the upper sarcophagi as they are, more could leak even without us opening them. The puddle flowed back from the grate, seeping into cracks in the floor and merging with dried streaks. I can help with that, it said. I know where the weaknesses are. I know which units are fragile. I can point you to the older channels that need bracing. Convenient, Knox muttered. Self-preserving. The surface quivered. If this place collapses, you lose your archive. We lose a comfortable home. Comfortable, I echoed, eyeing the non-human restraints. It did not answer. We spent the next hours under its direction and the log's hints. We braced failing supports with portable struts. We reconnected some of the old plates, rerouting flows according to diagrams the puddle projected onto Evans's screen. We sealed every lid we had opened, checked clamps, added new straps. Each time we tightened a bolt, I imagined my father's pattern flinching. I did it anyway. When we finally climbed back to the main control room, my legs were heavy. The container on my back seemed to pull downward with more than its mass. We ascend as soon as we can, I told the group. The weather window won't stay open just because something under us can think in channels. Outside, the storm had blown through. Hard blue sky arched over the glacier when we stepped out through the crevasse. The world up here felt almost simple after the architecture below. We roped up again. I tightened the pack straps until their edges bit my shoulders. "Remember," I warned, "no one touches this pack. If I fall, you cut me loose. We'll haul you up. You'll cut me loose." I met each man's eyes. "If this thing touches snowmelt and finds its way into a stream, it won't need your ropes." He studied me, then nodded. "Understood." We crossed the scar where the previous slab had broken away. The gap yawned on one side. The ice underfoot felt less trustworthy, as if aware of what we carried. Halfway to the far ridge, my right boot punched through a thin crust. My weight dropped. The rope snapped taut. I caught myself with my axe. The container slammed into my spine as the pack shifted. A sharp sting flared at my wrist. I looked down. The impact had torn the glove where it met my sleeve. A hairline crack had formed at one corner of the container's outer shell, where it had struck buried rock. From that crack, a thin tendril of black fluid seeped out, beading along the seam. It slid onto my glove, found the tear and touched skin. The contact lasted less than a second. I yanked my arm back and crushed the rip against my jacket, smearing the tendril across fabric. The rest of the leak oozed back toward the crack, then withdrew, vanishing from sight. "Nima?" Pasang called. "You okay?" "Fine." It was a lie. In that instant of contact, something moved inside my head. Images slammed into me in a single heartbeat, a barracks corridor under fluorescent tubes. A Soviet mess hall with tin trays and blunt cutlery. A room in my own village seen from a stranger's height. The one where officers had handed my mother a folded flag. Voices tangled together. Orders barked in English and Russian. My name called by my mother, my father, a man with an American accent. The barrage faded. The mountain snapped back into focus. "Glove tear," I managed. "Containers sealed again. Keep moving. We're losing light." "You sure?" Knox's gaze drilled into my face. "Yes." He didn't argue. The slope ahead demanded attention. The mountain didn't care about what had just slithered under my skin. We reached solid rock. The crevasse fell behind us. The pass loomed ahead, a notch in the ridge that matched the route the puddle had described. The leaning boulder. The narrow ledge that required sideways steps, back to stone, packs scraping the wall. Every landmark matched my father's pattern, or the piece the entity had chosen to show us. At the high point of the pass, a bare patch of rock wide enough for a helicopter opened to the sky. Holbrook pulled a flare and checked the radio frequency. "Window opens in 20 minutes. He listened to static. "We broadcast. They send a bird if the air corridors are clear. And if 3 air defense networks don't notice a helicopter swinging like a bright toy over their contested border," Namgyal muttered. Holbrook keyed the radio anyway. "This is Survey Team Kilo 3, requesting extraction at prearranged coordinates. Package secured. Casualties sustained. Repeat, extraction requested. Package secured." Static. Then faintly, a distorted voice with the right call sign. Coordinates confirmed. Time to arrival. Unspecified, but soon. We waited. The container on my back throbbed gently. Every pulse seemed to sync with a tiny twitch in my left eyelid, as if something inside me and something inside the metal had found the same rhythm. I kept my hands folded, resisting the urge to scratch. Evans sank onto a rock, cradling his arm. "We'll need a decontamination protocol when we reach the facility. Quarantine, specialized containment, psychological monitoring." Holbrook nodded. "I've requested a secure chain. Obsidian will want you both under observation." "Both," I echoed. "You had contact. We all saw it. Briefly. That's enough." Knox studied me. The altered half of his face drooped when he was tired. It sagged now. The eye on that side blinked just out of sync with the other. "If you start mixing up names up there, they'll lock you in a box too," he warned. "Different style of box, same idea. I'll pass your concern to my attorney." "You don't have an attorney." "Then I'll pass it to my mother." His mouth twitched, half smile, half grimace. We heard the helicopter before we saw it, a growing roar in thin air. The craft grew from a speck to a presence, rotors beating the sky. No flag on its skin, just muted paint meant to blend into mountain shadow. The pilot flared above the landing zone, then dropped, skids kissing rock. Rotor wash hurled grit across the pass. The door slid open. A crewman in a helmet gestured urgently. Holbrook waved the others in. "Move! Secure the package in the aft bay. Helmets on and ignore anything you hear on the intercom that doesn't come through my channel." "Why wouldn't we?" Pasang shouted over the noise. "Because we've been breathing an environment saturated with something that likes to mimic voices. I'm not taking chances." We piled in. The interior smelled of oil and canvas and sharp disinfectant pads strapped along the walls. We strapped in. The container was anchored to a bracket with netting and belts. I sat nearest, shoulder against metal. As the helicopter lifted, the valley slid beneath us. Ridges, glaciers, the pale scar of the crevasse. Lingpa Ri's summit watched with its blank, ordinary face. No one spoke. Once we cleared the immediate peaks and settled into the long, low run toward whatever base Obsidian had arranged, Holbrook leaned closer. "When we land, there'll be debriefs," he murmured. "Medical checks, some theater, some real. Answer questions, but don't volunteer anything that can turn into a reason to keep you indefinitely. You're concerned for my freedom now. I'm concerned for my data source." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You've been exposed to this thing more directly than anyone alive. That makes you valuable and dangerous. Will you tell them about my father's pattern? They'll see it in the logs. Even if I wanted to omit it, the recordings will show we opened that unit. You could delete those entries. Not all of them without someone noticing. Obsidian thrives on paranoia." "So do mountains," I said. "They didn't keep me in their labs, not at the start." The helicopter set down at a remote strip behind a ring of hills. A low compound waited there, painted in the same drab tones as the aircraft. Inside, corridors ran in straight lines, the way engineers who feared irregularity preferred. They took the container away on a trolley. A team in full protective gear surrounded it, connected it to external power and slid it into a chamber behind thick glass. A doctor examined me. Scans, reflex tests, questions about my childhood. I answered carefully, omitting the brief rush of foreign memories when the fluid touched my skin. If they heard I'd already integrated some of its record, they might decide the safest place for me was another basin. They kept us for a week, blood tests, cognitive evaluations, interviews. They paid my contract in full, plus a bonus for unexpected contributions. When they released me, they did it quietly. No medals, no ceremony, just a stamped discharge paper and a vehicle to carry me to the nearest road home. My brother met me at the edge of the village. His uniform had been replaced by a worn jacket. No conscription markings on his papers. The exemption had gone through. "You're thinner," he observed. "You're not." We walked home without discussing Lingpa Ri. I told my mother the Americans' project had been dull. Ice thickness, computer models, bad coffee. That the real danger had come from weather. She watched my face like a man trying to read small print in dim light. Then she nodded and spooned lentils onto my plate, as if feeding me could fix anything. Some nights I woke from dreams where I was sealing a sarcophagus lid, and my own hands were on the inside of the clamps. Other nights I dreamed of corridors I had never walked, but could trace in the morning. Every junction, every gate. I did not trace them. I went back to work. Tourist season never quite returned to its old rhythm. The valley felt different. Patrols passed more often, vehicles with plates from the capital and insignia of units that cared more about satellites than smugglers. New research projects appeared near the range. Survey teams came and went with heavy security. One afternoon, a minor official from the district office stopped by my house. He wore civilian clothes, but his haircut and posture belonged to the military. "There's a new international climate initiative," he told me. "They need local guides familiar with high-altitude anomalies. Pays well. They asked for recommendations." Climate. "You have experience with foreign research teams." He smiled politely. "I told them you might be interested." He left a card with a phone number and an email address ending in a sequence of letters I recognized from obsidian paperwork. After he left, I sat at my desk, the same desk where I had signed the first contract. The old map of Lingpa Ri under the new one hung above me. The white patch still glared. I stared at my hands. The scars on my fingers told stories. A ridgeline fall at 15, a misjudged anchor at 20, an argument with a stove hinge at 28. Lately I had been losing track of which scar came from which incident. In the market that morning, I had greeted an old man by a nickname I couldn't remember ever using before. He responded as if it was something my father had called him years ago. His smile held relief and grief together. I hadn't corrected him. When I tied knots for clients, my fingers sometimes wanted to move in a sequence my teachers had never drilled into me. More efficient wraps at certain angles, like those used by foreign military climbers. I had never been trained that way. I used those knots anyway. They held. At night, when the village quieted, I heard my name in the back of my skull, a sense of someone going down a list of stored patterns and checking which ones remained active. Dorje Nima, guide, local asset. One evening, I took the old map off the wall. I spread it on the floor and weighted the corners with stones. The contour lines around Lingpa Ri wound in tight loops. The height was written in black ink that had blurred over time. I traced the ascent route we had taken, the crevasse, the tunnel, the hangar. I traced the alternative path, the side pass, the helicopter zone. The line my father had scouted long ago. The line I had walked with the container on my back. My finger paused over a spot in the mountain's heart where no human had ever carved anything. The place where the older channels must meet, deep under both Cold War concrete and ancient metal. In my mind, a chamber opened. I couldn't see it like a photograph, but I knew its layout with the certainty of a place my feet had never touched, and someone else's had. A volume larger than the hangars, walls lined in grooves that sang with the movement of unseen patterns. No sarcophagi, no restraints, just convergence. I knew, without knowing how, that if I ever stood there, I would hear my own voice returning from every direction, not as an echo, but as a playback. I folded the map carefully. Later that week, the official's contact called. "We're organizing another advanced survey," the voice on the line informed me. "Different team, different objectives, same general region. We'd like to hire you as lead guide. Your experience with unusual terrain is considered valuable." Obsidian again. A pause. "That name doesn't appear on any document you'll see." "It doesn't have to." I watched the mountains through the window. You don't change a pattern by painting over its label. "Will you take the job?" Outside, the mountains loomed, solid and indifferent. Lingpa Ri's peak hid behind nearer ridges, unseen but present. The valley in front of my house bustled with ordinary life. Boys kicking a ball, old men arguing about cricket scores, a vendor arranging apples. If I refused, they would hire someone else. A younger guide, maybe, someone less cautious, someone more impressed by cash. The mountain would still keep names. The thing beneath it would still listen. The people above would still live in its shadow without knowing what moved under their feet. If I accepted, I stayed in the pipeline that fed that thing. I also stayed in the loop. I could see what they did. In small ways, I could nudge. You think refusing now changes the trajectory? The imitation of my father had told me. Purpose is an overlay, The route is what matters. I realized I had chosen my route the moment I stepped into the crevasse. Everything since had been small adjustments along a path that led deeper into someone else's game. "Yes," I heard myself say. "I'll take it." "Excellent." The voice sounded relieved. "You'll receive paperwork by courier. Same rates, possibly higher given your experience. Send it." I hung up. In the small mirror by the door, my reflection watched me. I lifted a hand. The man in the mirror did the same, perfectly in time. Changes showed if you knew where to look. A certain way my eyes tracked movement, as if expecting the world to glitch. The faintest shadow of foreign expressions that didn't belong to the boy who'd grown up in this valley. The mountain had what it wanted. A pattern of me stored beneath stone, captured in a basin of something that learned. Up here, I had what I had chosen. My family housed and fed, my brother's name off the list, my role as an expert they had to consult instead of a villager they could ignore. Survival, at a price. I picked up my pack and checked its seams. When I stepped outside, the air felt thinner than it had the day before. Or maybe I just felt the channels under the ground more clearly, the routes the entity could ride if it ever grew tired of stone. Ling Pa Ri sat unseen beyond the nearer peaks. Old maps remembered its name. New maps left it blank. I knew better. The mountain that keeps names doesn't need ink. It has us.